She was invited to her billionaire, ex-husband's wedding to be. Humiliated. Then she walked in with twins no one knew existed. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold on to her son's fingers. Rain pounded against the ornate windows of Ashford Manor, and through the heavy oak door ahead she could hear voices. His voice, the voice that still haunted her dreams 8 years later. Luca squeezed her hand. "Mama, are you ready?" Vivian Ashford looked down at her 8-year-old sons, these beautiful boys with their father's storm-gray eyes and dark curls, and realized she would never be ready for this. Ready to face the man who thought she'd abandoned him for money. Ready to shatter his engagement, his wedding, his entire world with a truth he'd never imagined. The library door opened. She stepped inside. And 20 minutes later, after lawyers and legal documents and 8 years of buried pain exploding into the open, her son's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "Are you our papa?" The billionaire architect Julian Blackwood stared at the two boys who looked exactly like him, his face draining. Of all color, his expensive suit suddenly seeming like costume on a man whose entire reality was crumbling. "You have children," he whispered. His voice cracked on the last word. "You were pregnant when you left me. When you wrote that letter saying I meant nothing, you were carrying my sons." Vivian felt the room spinning, felt 8 years of sacrifice and silence, and unbearable loneliness rising in her throat like a scream. "Yes," she breathed. And across the room, the elegant blonde fiancée who was supposed to marry him in 3 weeks slowly removed her engagement ring, understanding with perfect clarity that she'd already lost him, that perhaps she'd never really had him at all. If you've ever had to face the person who broke your heart, knowing you're about to break theirs even more, then you understand what happened next. If you've ever made a sacrifice so painful that no one could ever know the truth, then this story is for you. Hit that like button right now, because what you're about to hear will change everything you think you know about love, sacrifice, and the impossible choices we make to protect the people we can't stop loving. And trust me, you'll want to stick around for this, because the truth that comes out is something no one saw coming. 2 weeks earlier, the Tuscan sun had been setting over the olive groves when Vivian found the letter. It lay on her weathered kitchen table like a snake coiled to strike. Heavy cream envelope. Embossed seal she hadn't seen in 8 years. Hartwell and Associates, Solicitors, London. A name that belonged to a life she'd run from with nothing but heartbreak and a secret growing in her womb. Through the open window she could hear Luca and Matteo laughing in the garden. Their voices were bright with the uncomplicated joy of childhood, chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. Their dark curls caught the golden light as they ran, and her heart clenched, the way it always did when she saw how much they looked like him. Like Julian Blackwood, the man who'd loved her once, the man who thought she'd destroyed them for money and status, the man who had no idea he was a father. Vivian's hands trembled as she broke the seal. The parchment inside was thick, formal, cold. "Dear Miss Ashford, we regret to inform you of the passing of Lord Edmund Ashford, your father. His last will and testament requires your presence at Ashford Manor, London, on the 15th of September at 2 p.m. Please note that attendance is mandatory for all beneficiaries. Failure to appear will result in forfeiture of any inheritance. Yours faithfully, Charles Hartwell, Esquire." Her father, dead. She waited for grief to come, but felt only a hollow emptiness where emotions should have lived. Edmund Ashford had been a cold, distant figure, even before she'd fled England. A man who valued the family name above all else. A man who'd stood silent while her older brother Marcus had orchestrated the cruelest choice any woman could face. But it was the final line that made her blood run cold. All beneficiaries. That meant Marcus would be there. The brother who'd destroyed her life with surgical precision. The brother who'd held Julian's future in his hands like a weapon and forced her to choose between love and survival. And if Marcus was there, if the will involved both families as she suddenly suspected, then Julian would be there too. "Mama," Luca's voice called from the garden. Matteo caught 5 fireflies. "Come see." Vivian set the letter down with hands that shook. For 8 years, she'd built a sanctuary here in the Tuscan hills. A small cottage surrounded by lavender fields. A life of simple beauty, far from the poisonous elegance of London's elite. She'd raised her sons in sunlight and truth, teaching them Italian and English, filling their days with art and music and the uncomplicated goodness she'd never known in her own childhood. But she'd also filled their hearts with stories of their father, of Julian Blackwood, the brilliant architect with storm-gray eyes and gentle hands, who'd once loved their mother with a passion that made the stars seem dim. She'd told them sanitized versions of their story, how circumstances had torn them apart, how she'd had to leave to protect him, how he didn't know they existed because she'd never found the courage to tell him. The boys asked about him constantly. They'd created an entire mythology around the father they'd never met, drawing pictures of what they imagined he looked like, remarkably accurate, given they'd inherited his features, writing him letters they never sent, wondering if he ever thought about their mother, and now fate was offering her a chance, or perhaps delivering a final devastating blow. Something else had been tucked inside the envelope. A magazine, glossy, expensive, the kind that covered London society with breathless reverence. The page was already marked, and Vivian's heart stopped when she saw it. Julian Blackwood and his fiancée Celeste Winters photographed at the Rothschild Charity Gala. The headline gushed about their upcoming October wedding, a merger of two powerful families, the perfect match. He looked older in the photograph, harder. The softness she'd loved, the way his eyes had crinkled when he laughed, the gentle curve of his mouth when he'd whispered, her name like a prayer, all of it had been replaced by a cold sophistication that broke her heart all over again. This was what her sacrifice had created. She'd destroyed their love to save his life, and in doing so, had turned him into a man who looked like he'd forgotten how to truly live. Celeste Winters stood beside him in a gown that probably cost more than Vivian's yearly income. Beautiful, polished, perfect, everything Vivian had never been in the eyes of her family. The photo credit was unmistakable, sent by Marcus Ashford. Her brother's cruel signature was all over this. He wanted her to know, wanted her to see Julian happy with someone else, wanted to twist the knife one more time. That night, after the boys finally fell asleep, with dreams of fireflies and gelato dancing in their heads, Vivienne sat alone on her small terrace. A glass of wine sat untouched beside her, and she allowed herself to remember. She'd been 23 when she met Julian Blackwood, young, idealistic, desperately trying to escape the suffocating weight of her family's expectations. Her father had sent her to complete a master's degree in art history at Cambridge, not out of support for her passions, but because it was what daughters of noble families did. A year of acceptable education before being married off to some suitable bore who would merge estates and consolidate power. But Cambridge had given her something her father never anticipated: freedom. And in that freedom, in a small cafe near the Fitzwilliam Museum where she'd been sketching Renaissance paintings, she'd met Julian. He'd been sitting at the next table, blueprints spread before him, his dark hair falling into his eyes as he sketched with intense concentration. An architecture student, she'd learned later. A man who built dreams out of lines and light, who saw beauty in structure and possibility in empty space. Their eyes had met over steaming cups of tea, and Vivian had felt the world tilt on its axis. "You're drawing the Botticelli wrong," he'd said with a slight smile, nodding toward her sketchbook. She'd bristled immediately. "Excuse me?" "The angle of Venus's hand. You've got it at 45 degrees, but Botticelli painted it at closer to 60. Changes the whole flow of the composition." Vivian had looked down at her sketch, then back at this presumptuous stranger, ready to deliver a cutting remark. But then she'd seen his eyes, gray as a winter storm, warm with amusement and intelligence, and the words had died on her lips. "Show me," she'd said instead. He'd moved to her table, his shoulder brushing hers as he leaned over her sketchbook, and that simple touch had ignited something in her chest that she'd never felt before. He'd taken her pencil, his hand guiding hers, and together they'd corrected the angle. "There," he'd murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "See how it flows better now? How her gesture becomes an invitation rather than a barrier." Vivian had seen nothing but the way his fingers felt against hers, the way her heart was racing like she'd run a marathon, the way the cafe suddenly seemed too small to contain whatever was happening between them. "I'm Julian," he'd said, pulling back slightly but not letting go of her hand. "Vivian," she'd breathed. And in that moment, surrounded by the smell of coffee and rain beginning to fall outside, Vivian Ashford had fallen completely, irrevocably, devastatingly in love. Now, 8 years later, sitting alone under the Tuscan stars, Vivienne pressed her hand to her chest where the memory lived like a permanent ache. Those first months had been magic. Stolen afternoons in Julian's studio, surrounded by blueprints and models of buildings that existed only in his imagination. He'd shown her how architecture was frozen music, how a well-designed space could make people feel joy or peace or wonder. She'd shown him how art history revealed the human heart across centuries, how a single brushstroke could contain an entire world of emotion. Evenings walking along the Cam, discussing philosophy and dreams and the lives they wanted to build, his hand always in hers, their fingers interlaced like they'd been designed to fit together. Nights wrapped in each other's arms in his small flat above a bookshop, learning every inch of each other's bodies and souls. The way he kissed her like she was oxygen and he was drowning. The way she'd trace the planes of his face in the darkness, memorizing him, certain she'd never need anything else to be happy. He'd been everything her cold, aristocratic upbringing had never prepared her for. Passionate, creative, deeply, fundamentally good. He'd looked at her not as Lady Vivienne Ashford, daughter of nobility, but as simply Vivienne, a woman who loved art and laughter, and making love in the afternoon light streaming through his windows. "Marry me," he'd said one morning 6 months after they'd met. They'd been lying in bed, sheets tangled around them, sunlight painting gold across his chest. His gray eyes had been serious and shining with love. "I know it's fast," he'd continued. "I know your family will object, but I don't care, Vivienne. I love you. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life and grow old arguing about Botticelli's brushstrokes." She'd said yes without hesitation, her heart so full of joy she thought she might burst with it. They'd kept it secret at first, planning a small wedding. Just the two of them and a few close friends. Julian had been working on the biggest project of his young career, a commission to restore a historic building in London, a job that would establish his reputation and secure their future. Everything had seemed perfect, poised on the edge of a beautiful life together. And then Marcus had found out. Vivian's eyes burned with tears as she remembered the day her brother had appeared at her Cambridge flat, his handsome face cold with calculation. "Father knows about your little architect," Marcus had said without preamble, letting himself in as if he owned the place, as if he owned her. "He's not pleased." "I don't care," Vivian had said, trying for defiance but hearing the tremor in her own voice. "I'm 23 years old, Marcus. I can make my own choices." "Can you?" Marcus had smiled then, the expression never reaching his ice blue eyes. "Because I have something interesting to show you." He'd pulled out a folder, spreading photographs and documents across her small kitchen table. Financial records, bank statements, evidence of massive debts her father had incurred, gambling debts owed to people with names that made Vivian's blood run cold, the kind of people who didn't forgive unpaid debts, who made people disappear. "Father's been living beyond his means for years," Marcus had explained with clinical detachment. "The estate is mortgaged to the hilt. We owe money to some very dangerous people, people who don't care about titles or family names. What does this have to do with me?" Vivian had whispered, though she'd already known, already felt the trap closing around her. "These people have given us 3 months to pay. £5 million, or they start taking collateral. And their idea of collateral isn't property, sister dear. It's blood." Marcus had pulled out another photograph then. Vivian's heart had stopped. It was Julian, leaving his studio, completely unaware that he was being watched and photographed. The image was grainy, taken from across the street with a telephoto lens. Surveillance. "Your architect has been very visible lately," Marcus had said casually. "All those newspaper articles about the brilliant young designer winning the Ashworth Building Commission. Easy to find, easy to target, easy to make disappear if debts aren't paid." Vivian had felt her world crumbling. "No. Marcus, please. There's a way out," Marcus had continued, ignoring her plea. "Lord Henley has offered to marry you. He's willing to pay off father's debts in exchange for the Ashford name and a suitable bride. The wedding is arranged for the end of the month." "I won't do it," Vivian had said, but her voice had sounded weak even to her own ears. "Then Julian Blackwood dies," Marcus had said simply. "These people don't make idle threats, Vivian. They've already made it clear that if we don't pay, they'll take their pound of flesh from whatever we value most. And now, thanks to your indiscretion, they know exactly what, or rather who, you value." He'd shown her more photographs then. Julian at the market, Julian meeting with clients, Julian laughing with friends outside a pub. Every image a threat, every moment of his normal life now shadowed by danger he couldn't see. "You have 3 days to decide," Marcus had said, gathering his folder. "Marry Henley and save your lover's life. or follow your heart and attend his funeral. Your choice, sister. And then he'd left, leaving Vivian alone with an impossible decision. The choice had been impossible. Her love or his life. Her happiness or his survival. She'd spent those 3 days in agony, trying to find another way out. But Marcus had blocked every exit. She couldn't go to the police. Her family's debts were legitimate, and Marcus had made sure there was no evidence of the threats against Julian. She couldn't tell Julian the truth. He would have done something recklessly heroic and gotten himself killed. She couldn't run. Marcus had made it clear they'd find them anywhere. The only way to save Julian's life was to destroy his heart. She'd written the letter on the 4th day, her tears smudging the ink. Julian, I can't do this anymore. I thought I loved you, but I've realized I was just playing at being normal, at being someone I'm not. I'm Lady Vivian Ashford, and that comes with responsibilities and expectations you could never understand. I'm marrying Lord Henley at the end of the month. He can give me the life I was born to have. The status, the security, the proper place in society. You were a wonderful distraction, but that's all this ever was. Please don't contact me again. It's better this way. 5th, every word had felt like swallowing poison. Every sentence had killed a piece of her soul. But she'd sealed the letter and left it at Julian's studio, along with the engagement ring he'd given her. A simple band with a small sapphire, chosen because he'd said it matched her eyes. She'd never seen him again after that. Marcus had whisked her away to London, where she'd gone through the motions of wedding preparations like a ghost. Fittings for a wedding dress she'd never wear. Menu tastings for a reception that would never happen. Smiling for photographers while her heart bled out inside her chest. But fate, it seemed, had one final cruelty in store. 3 days before the wedding to Lord Henley, Vivian had discovered she was pregnant. The memory of that moment still had the power to bring her to her knees, staring at the positive test in the bathroom of her father's London manor, her hands shaking, her world shattering all over again. She'd been carrying Julian's child, or children, as she'd find out later, twins, and she was about to marry another man. The choice had become even more impossible. If she went through with the wedding, Lord Henley would eventually discover the truth. If she didn't, Julian would still be in danger, and she'd have nowhere to go. That night, Vivian had made her final, desperate choice. She'd stolen money from her father's safe. Not much, but enough for a new start. She'd forged documents, created a new identity, and fled to the one place she'd always dreamed of living. The Italian countryside she'd studied in her art history courses, where Renaissance painters had captured beauty and where she might find some small piece of peace. She'd left a note for Marcus. Simple. Final. I can't marry Henley. Do what you want to me, but leave Julian alone. He's not part of this anymore. 5th. And then she'd disappeared. For 8 years, she'd lived in fear that Marcus would find her, that the people her father owed money to would track her down, that Julian would somehow discover the truth and hate her even more for keeping his children from him. But gradually she'd realized that Marcus had actually been relieved by her disappearance. With her gone, he'd inherited everything, the estate, the title, the family fortune, or what was left of it. She'd been a complication he was happy to write off. And Julian, Vivian had followed his career from afar, through architecture magazines and society pages that sometimes made their way to her small Italian village. He'd completed the Ashworth building to critical acclaim. His firm had grown successful beyond his wildest dreams. He'd become one of London's most eligible bachelors, photographed at galas and charity events, always with a beautiful woman on his arm but never serious about anyone. Until Celeste Winters appeared 2 years ago. The daughter of a real estate magnate, she was perfect for him in all the ways Vivian had never been. Sophisticated, connected, comfortable in his world of money and status and carefully curated social circles. Their engagement had been announced 6 months ago in the Times, described as a partnership of equals and the union of 2 of London's most influential families. The words had felt like a eulogy for everything Vivian had lost. Now, sitting under the stars with the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her, Vivian wondered if she'd made the right decision all those years ago. She'd saved Julian's life, yes. Marcus had made good on his promise to leave Julian alone once she'd disappeared. But she destroyed his heart in the process, and her own in the bargain. And their sons. Luca and Matteo had grown up without a father, had spent their entire lives wondering about the man who'd helped create them. not knowing that their mother's sacrifice was the only thing that had kept him safe. "I hope you can forgive me," Vivian whispered to the night, to the ghost of the young man she'd loved, to the hardened stranger he'd become. "I hope someday you'll understand." But as she finally rose and went inside to pack for their journey to London, Vivian couldn't shake the feeling that forgiveness was the one thing Julian Blackwood would never offer her. The next morning, she told the boys. They were eating breakfast on the terrace, honey dripping from warm cornetti, when Vivian set the letter on the table between them. "We're going to London," she said quietly. Both boys looked up, eyes wide. Luca's face split into an enormous grin. Mateo's expression was more cautious, reading the tension in his mother's shoulders. "Is it because of Nono?" Mateo asked. He'd always been the more intuitive twin, feeling emotions in the air like changes in weather. "Yes," Vivian said. "My father passed away. Your grandfather. There's a will reading we have to attend." "Did you love him?" Luca asked with a child's blunt curiosity. Vivian considered lying, then decided her sons deserved truth. "No," she said softly. "He wasn't a kind man. But he was family, and there are things I need to take care of." "Will or Papa be there?" Mateo's question was quiet, hopeful, terrified. And there it was, the question that had been eating at her since she'd opened the envelope. "I think so," Vivian admitted. "The will involves both families. So yes, I think your father will be there." The boys looked at each other, having one of those silent twin conversations that needed no words. Then Luca turned back to her, his gray eyes, Julian's eyes, blazing with determination. "Then we have to go," he said firmly. "We have to meet him, Mama. We've waited our whole lives. What if he doesn't want to know us?" Mateo's fear was raw, vulnerable. What if he's angry that we exist? Vivian's heart broke. She knelt between their chairs, pulling both boys into her arms. "Listen to me," she said fiercely. "If your father knew about you, he would love you more than all the stars in the sky. The reason he doesn't know isn't because I didn't want him to. It's because circumstances made it impossible." "What kind of circumstances?" Luca pressed. "Dangerous ones," Vivian said carefully. "Grown-up problems that I had to solve by leaving, by keeping you safe. But we're not in danger now, right?" Mateo asked. "No, Tesoro. We're safe now, which is why I think, maybe, it's time for the truth." "Does he know you're coming?" Luca asked. "No." "Does he know we exist?" "No." Both boys absorbed this. Then Mateo said something that nearly broke her. "Mama, you protected us and Papa by leaving him. Maybe now it's time to protect all of us by going back to him. The wisdom of children. Simple. Devastating. True. You're right," Vivian whispered. "You're absolutely right. Have you ever had to return to a place that nearly destroyed you? Have you ever had to face someone knowing that the truth you're carrying will change their entire life? Drop a comment if you've ever had to be that brave, because what happened next took more courage than Vivian knew she had. They packed that afternoon. The boys were electric with excitement and nerves, asking a million questions. What does London look like? Will Papa like us? Can we see Big Ben? Do you think he'll want to play football with us? Vivian answered what she could, her own anxiety building with every item she folded into suitcases. She pulled out a small wooden box from the back of her closet. Inside were the only things she'd kept from her old life. A photograph of Julian, taken on one of their walks along the Cam. He was laughing at something she'd said, his whole face alight with joy. This was the photo she'd shown the boys when they asked what their father looked like. Also in the box were the blueprints he'd drawn for their future home, sketched one lazy Sunday morning in bed, imagining the house they'd build together someday. Large windows to let in light, a studio for her to paint, a workshop for him to create models, a garden for children to play in. Children he'd never known they'd created. Vivian touched the faded paper, her fingers tracing lines he'd drawn 8 years ago, and allowed herself one moment of grief for everything they'd lost. Then she closed the box and finished packing. London greeted them with gray skies and cold rain, a stark contrast to the golden warmth of Tuscany. Vivian stood on the steps of Ashford Manor with her sons pressed close to her sides, and felt the weight of 8 years pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. The manor looked exactly as she remembered. Imposing. Cold. Beautiful in its severe Georgian architecture. This was the house where she'd grown up lonely and isolated, where her mother had died when she was 12, where her father had valued duty above love, and her brother had learned that power mattered more than people. This was the house she'd fled from, and now she'd returned, bringing with her the two greatest secrets of her life. "Mama, it's so big," Luca breathed, his eyes wide as he took in the three-story facade. The perfectly manicured gardens, the fountain in the circular drive. "It's cold," Matteo said with a child's honesty, shivering despite his warm jacket. "Not like home, no," Vivian agreed softly. "Not like home." A butler she didn't recognize opened the door. His face was impassive as he took in the woman and children on the doorstep. "Lady Vivian?" he asked with professional courtesy. The title felt strange after 8 years of being simply Vivian or Mama. She nodded, unable to speak. "They're expecting you in the library," the butler said. "Mr. Hartwell is already here, along with the other beneficiaries." The other beneficiaries. Her stomach twisted with anxiety and dread. Julian was here. In this house. Perhaps just rooms away. "Can the boys wait somewhere else?" Vivian asked, suddenly desperate to shield them from whatever was about to happen. "There's a drawing room with refreshments prepared for the young masters," the butler said, and Vivian relaxed slightly. At least they'd be spared the first shock of it all. She knelt before her sons, straightening Luca's collar and brushing Matteo's curls from his forehead. "I need you both to be very brave," she said softly. "There are some people here that I haven't seen in a very long time, and it might be difficult. Can you wait in the drawing room and be on your best behavior?" Both boys nodded solemnly, though Luca's eyes were bright with curiosity. "Is Papa?" he asked. Vivian's breath caught. "Maybe," she admitted. "I don't know for certain, but if he is," Matteo said seriously, "can we meet him?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with hope and possibility and fear. Vivian thought of Julian's engagement announcement, of Celeste Winters with her perfect smile and her perfect life, of the man Julian had become in her absence. "We'll see," she said finally. "One step at a time, Tesoro." The butler led them inside, depositing the boys in a cheerful drawing room with biscuits and juice, and promising to check on them regularly. Then he guided Vivian down the long hallway toward the library, the same walk she'd taken 1,000 times as a child, each step echoing with memory and regret. At the library door, Vivian paused, pressing one hand to her chest where her heart was racing like a trapped bird. 8 years. 8 years of longing and loss and loneliness. 8 years of raising their children alone. 8 years of loving a man who believed she'd chosen wealth over him. And now, on the other side of this door, he waited. The butler opened the door, announcing her. "Lady Vivian Ashford." The library fell silent. Vivian stepped inside, her eyes immediately finding the tall figure standing by the window, and the world stopped. Julian Blackwood turned at the sound of her name, and their eyes met across the room. He looked exactly the same, and completely different, all at once. The years had refined his features, adding lines around his eyes and a hardness to his jaw that hadn't been there before. His dark hair was shorter, professionally styled. He wore an expensive suit that spoke of his success, his status, his distance, from the struggling architecture student she'd fallen in love with. But his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had haunted her dreams for 8 years, held the same devastating impact. For a heartbeat, she saw recognition, shock, and something that might have been longing flash across his face. Then his expression closed, becoming cold and polite and utterly impenetrable. "Vivian," he said, his voice controlled and distant. "It's been a long time." She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. All the words she'd practiced, all the explanations she'd rehearsed in her mind, evaporated like morning mist. She could only stare at him, drinking in every detail, memorizing the man he'd become. "Mr. Blackwood," she managed finally, the formal address feeling like glass in her throat. "I didn't know you'd be here. The reading involves both families," said a cold voice from across the room. Vivian's attention shifted to her brother Marcus, who sat in their father's favorite chair like a king on a throne. He'd aged as well, his handsome features hardened by 8 years of whatever schemes he'd been running. "Father's will has some interesting provisions," Marcus continued, his smile sharp. Vivian's hands clenched into fists. Marcus, the architect of her destruction, sitting there with that knowing smirk, clearly enjoying her discomfort. "If everyone is assembled," said an elderly man Vivian assumed was Mr. Hartwell, the solicitor, "we should begin." "We're waiting for one more," said a feminine voice. Vivian turned to see a striking blonde woman enter the room, moving immediately to Julian's side and placing a possessive hand on his arm. Celeste Winters. Of course she'd be here. Darling, who is this? Celeste asked Julian, her blue eyes assessing Vivian with the coldness of someone evaluating a potential threat. An old acquaintance, Julian said, his voice carefully neutral. Lady Vivian Ashford. Vivian, this is my fiancée, Celeste Winters. The word fiancé hit Vivian like a physical blow, even though she'd known it was coming. She forced herself to nod politely, to maintain her composure even as her heart shattered all over again. Charmed, Celeste said with a smile that held no warmth. I've heard so little about you, because Julian doesn't speak about me at all, Vivian thought. Because he's buried the past as deeply as I have. Because what we had is dead to him. Mr. Hartwell cleared his throat, pulling everyone's attention back to the matter at hand. Shall we begin? He asked. The reading of the will was complicated, full of legal language and provisions that Vivian barely processed. Her entire focus was on remaining standing, on not collapsing under the weight of being in the same room as Julian after 8 years of absence. She caught glimpses of him throughout. The way his jaw clenched when Marcus spoke. The way his hand tightened on the chair back when Mr. Hartwell mentioned provisions involving both families. The way his eyes kept drifting to her face when he thought she wasn't looking. And finally, Mr. Hartwell was saying, his voice cutting through Vivian's haze, to my daughter, Lady Vivian Ashford, I leave the summer estate in Cornwall on the condition that she remains in England for no less than 6 months following this reading, and that she work in conjunction with Mr. Julian Blackwood to oversee its restoration. The words landed like a bomb. Vivian's head snapped up. What? Julian's expression had gone from carefully neutral to thunderous. Edmund wanted us to work together? It was his final wish, Mr. Hartwell said, consulting the document. The summer estate has fallen into disrepair. Lord Ashford specified that Lady Vivian, with her art history expertise, and Mr. Blackwood, with his architectural knowledge, were to collaborate on its restoration. If either party refuses, the estate goes to the National Trust and neither receives their inheritance. This is absurd, Celeste said sharply. Julian has responsibilities in London. He can't possibly spend 6 months working with. She gestured dismissively at Vivian. The will is quite clear, Mr. Hartwell said apologetically. 6 months, minimum. Work to begin within the next fortnight. Vivian felt the room spinning. 6 months, working alongside Julian, seeing him every day while he was engaged to another woman, while she harbored the secret of their children just rooms away, while her heart broke repeatedly from his proximity and distance. I won't do it, Julian said flatly, his eyes finding Vivian's across the room. Whatever you think you'll gain from this, whatever game you're playing. I'm not playing any game, Vivian interrupted, finding her voice at last. I didn't know about this any more than you did. Didn't you? His voice was cold, laced with bitterness that had festered for 8 years. You were always good at manipulation, Vivian. At making men believe you were something you weren't. The unfairness of it. The cruel irony that he thought she'd manipulated him when she'd sacrificed everything to save his life. It finally broke through her carefully maintained composure. You know nothing about what I was, she said, her voice shaking with suppressed emotion. Nothing about what I've been through, what I've lost, what you've lost. Julian laughed, the sound bitter and harsh. You chose to leave, Vivian. You chose wealth and status over everything we had, so don't stand there and talk to me about loss. Julian, darling, perhaps we should discuss this privately, Celeste interjected, but both Julian and Vivian ignored her. I chose, Vivian started, then stopped, her eyes flicking to Marcus, who was watching the exchange with barely concealed satisfaction. She couldn't tell Julian the truth. Not here. Not now. Not with Marcus listening. Not with Celeste looking at her like she was an inconvenient pest to be exterminated. You chose exactly what I thought you would, Julian finished for her, his voice cutting. Money. Position. Your precious family name. I was just a diversion, wasn't I? A way to rebel before settling into the life you were always meant to have. Each word was a knife through her heart, made more painful because she'd written almost identical words in the letter that had ended them. The letter she'd written to save his life. That had destroyed any chance of him trusting her again. Mama? The small voice from the doorway froze everyone in place. Vivian whirled to find Luca standing in the library entrance, Matteo just behind him. Both boys looking worried and confused. They'd clearly heard the raised voices and come to investigate. "Boys, I told you to wait," Vivian started, moving toward them instinctively. But Julian's voice stopped her cold. "Mama," he repeated, his face draining of color as he stared at the two 8-year-old boys who looked startlingly, undeniably like him. Luca and Matteo stepped fully into the room, their eyes going immediately to Julian. For a long moment, silence stretched like broken glass. Then Matteo, ever the more direct of the twins, spoke into the quiet with a child's devastating honesty. "Are you our papa?" The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Julian's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself, his knuckles going white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes moved from Luca to Matteo and back again, cataloging every detail. The dark curls, the gray eyes, the way Luca stood with one shoulder slightly higher than the other, exactly the way Julian himself stood. The way Matteo tilted his head when he was nervous, a gesture Julian had seen in his own reflection 1,000 times. "You have children," Julian whispered. His voice cracked on the last word, breaking like thin ice under too much weight. "You were pregnant when you left me." "Yes," Vivian breathed. The single word detonated in the library. Celeste's hand flew to her mouth, her perfectly composed face cracking with shock and something that looked like betrayal. Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his satisfied smirk faltering for the first time, clearly not having known about the children. Mr. Hartwell set down his papers with shaking hands, understanding that this reading had just become something far more complicated than a simple distribution of assets. But Julian looked like a man watching his entire world crumble in real time. "How old are they?" His voice was barely audible. 8, Vivian said. "They turned 8 in March." Julian did the math instantly. His face transformed, cycling through shock, disbelief, dawning horror. And then, a devastation so profound, it was painful to witness. "You were carrying my sons when you wrote that letter," he said. "When you told me I meant nothing. When you said I was just a distraction. You were pregnant with my children." "I was. And you never told me. Not a question. An accusation, a wound ripped open." "No," Vivian whispered. 8 years. Julian's voice was rising now, the careful control shattering. 8 years I've been a father and didn't know it. 8 years of birthdays and first days of school and scraped knees and bedtime stories. 8 years of their lives, and you kept them from me. Lucas stepped forward, his small face fierce with an 8-year-old's protective instinct for his mother. "She told us about you," he said loudly. "She said you didn't know about us. She showed us pictures and told us stories and said you would have loved us if you'd known." Julian's attention snapped to the boy, to his son, and his expression crumbled. "I would have," he said, his voice breaking completely now. "Oh God, I would have." Matteo moved closer to his brother, the two of them standing shoulder to shoulder in the face of all these shocked, angry adults. "She cries about you," Matteo said softly. "Every night when she thinks we're asleep, she looks at your picture and cries." The innocent revelation hit Julian like a physical blow. He looked at Vivian, really looked at her, and saw for the first time the toll 8 years had taken, the lines around her eyes, the exhaustion she carried, the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been surviving, not living. Celeste found her voice at last, sharp and cold as winter. "You brought your children to my fiancé's family meeting?" She turned to Julian, her blue eyes blazing. "You have children with your ex-lover, and you never thought to mention it?" "I didn't know," Julian said, still staring at the boys, at Vivian. "I swear to you, Celeste, I didn't know." But Celeste was watching the way he looked at Vivian, the way every ounce of his attention was focused on the woman and children who'd just walked back into his life, the way he'd completely forgotten Celeste existed. "You still love her," Celeste said. Not a question, a statement of devastating truth. Julian opened his mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. He couldn't lie. Not in this moment. Not with his sons watching him with those gray eyes that mirrored his own. His silence was answer enough. Celeste's composure finally shattered. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice remained controlled. "Cold. I won't be second to a ghost," she said quietly. "Or, apparently, to a very much alive woman with your children." She pulled the engagement ring from her finger. A massive diamond that had cost Julian a fortune and meant nothing compared to the simple sapphire band he'd given Vivian a lifetime ago. She placed it on the table with careful precision. "I won't marry a man who's in love with someone else," Celeste said, "even if that someone destroyed him. Especially then." She gathered her purse, her dignity wrapped around her like armor. "Celeste, wait," Julian started, but she cut him off with a look. "Don't," she said. "Don't insult me by pretending. I've known for months that you weren't really present in our relationship. I told myself you were just busy with work. But it was her, wasn't it? It's always been her." She walked to the door, her heels clicking on the marble floor. At the threshold, she paused. "For what it's worth," she said, looking at Vivienne, "I hope you deserve him, because he's wasted 8 years of his life mourning you." And then she was gone. The library fell into stunned silence. Julian stood frozen in place. Marcus looked like he was watching a play unfold, fascinated by the chaos. Mr. Hartwell was gathering his papers nervously, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Vivienne had her hands on her son's shoulders, anchoring herself to the only solid things in her spinning world. And the twins, Luca and Matteo, stood brave and uncertain, watching their father with a mixture of hope and fear that broke something fundamental in Julian's chest. He moved toward them slowly, like approaching something precious and fragile that might vanish if he moved too quickly. He knelt down to their eye level, his expensive suit creasing, his hands shaking. "I'm your father," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I didn't know about you, but I want you to know. If I had known, if I'd had any idea you existed, nothing in this world could have kept me away from you." Matteo studied his face with solemn intensity. "Do you mean that?" he asked. "With every part of my heart," Julian said. "From this moment forward, you and your brother are the most important things in my life." "What about her?" Luca asked, jutting his chin toward Vivienne. "You were shouting at Mama. You made her upset." Julian flinched. The boy was right. He'd been cruel, had said things he couldn't take back, had accused Vivienne of manipulation when he didn't know the full story. "I was angry," Julian admitted, "because I didn't understand. I thought your mother left me because she didn't love me anymore." "She never stopped loving you," Matteo said with a child's simple certainty. "She told us. Even when it hurt, she never stopped." Julian's eyes found Vivienne's across the room. She was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, but she made no move to come closer, maintaining the distance between them like a chasm neither knew how to cross. "Can you imagine finding out you're a father to children you never knew existed? Can you imagine 8 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and first words all happening without you? If you've ever missed something precious because you didn't know it was there, drop a comment, because what happens next is going to show you that some wounds take more than love to heal. They take truth." Julian rose to his feet, his attention shifting to Marcus, his brother, who'd been watching the drama unfold with calculating interest. "You knew," Julian said, his voice going dangerously quiet. "When she left 8 years ago, you knew something." Marcus's smile was sharp as a blade. "I knew she chose security over poverty," he said smoothly. "I knew she made the smart choice for a woman of her station." "That's not an answer," Julian said, taking a step toward him. "What did you do?" Vivienne's voice cut through the tension. "Julian, don't." But Luca, brave little Luca with his father's stubborn streak, spoke up. "The bad uncle hurt Mama," he said loudly. "She cries about it sometimes. She tells us grown-ups made bad choices." Everyone in the room stared at the 8-year-old. Julian turned back to Marcus, and something in his expression made even Marcus shift uncomfortably in his chair. "What did you do, Marcus?" Julian's voice was ice and fury. "What did you do to her?" "I saved my family from ruin," Marcus said, straightening his shoulders. "I did what was necessary." "By doing what?" The silence stretched long and painful. Then Vivienne's voice, barely a whisper, spoke the truth that had been buried for 8 years. "He told me you would die if I didn't leave." The room stopped breathing. Julian froze. "What?" Vivienne's dam broke. 8 years of secrets came flooding out, her voice cracking with the weight of it all. "My father had gambling debts," she said. "Millions of pounds owed to dangerous people. The kind of people who don't forgive and don't forget. Marcus showed me the evidence. Bank statements, threats, and photographs of you, Julian. You leaving your studio. You at the market. You meeting with clients. They were following you, watching you." Julian's face had gone pale. "Marcus gave me a choice," Vivienne continued. her words coming faster now, desperate to finally tell the truth. Marry Lord Henley, who would pay off the debts, or they would hurt you. Kill you, most likely. He had photographs, evidence that you were being watched. He said if I didn't marry Henley, they'd take their payment in blood. This is insane, Julian breathed. I tried to find another way, Vivian said, tears streaming freely now. For 3 days I tried everything, but Marcus blocked every exit. I couldn't go to the police. The debts were real, and there was no evidence of threats. I couldn't tell you because you would have done something recklessly brave and gotten yourself killed. I couldn't run because they'd find us. The only way to save your life was to make you hate me. So you wrote that letter, Julian said, understanding dawning in his eyes. Every word was a lie, Vivian said. Every single word. I wrote that I didn't love you, that you meant nothing, that I was choosing wealth and status, and it killed me. But I thought if you believed I was shallow and cruel, you'd move on. You'd be safe. You'd live. Julian turned to Marcus, rage transforming his features into something dangerous. You threatened to have me killed unless she married for money. Marcus shrugged, but there was nervousness in his eyes now. It was business, he said. Father's debts were real. The threats were real. She made her choice. Julian lunged across the room. It took Mr. Hartwell and 2 footmen, who'd been waiting outside, to pull them apart. Julian was breathing hard, his fist having connected once with Marcus's jaw before they'd intervened. Marcus was sprawled in the chair, blood trickling from his lip, his careful composure finally shattered. Get out, Julian said, his voice deadly calm now. Get out of this house before I forget I'm a civilized man. Marcus stood, straightening his jacket with as much dignity as he could muster. She still kept your children from you for 8 years, he said, delivering one final poisonous blow. That wasn't my doing. That was her choice. The words hit their mark. Julian's expression shifted, anger mixing with confusion and pain. Marcus left, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. The library door closed with a heavy thud. Mr. Hartwell cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we should adjourn, he suggested. Give everyone time to process. The will's provisions stand. 6 months. Cornwall estate. Both of you working together. We can discuss the details later. He gathered his papers quickly and left, clearly desperate to escape the emotional wreckage of the room. Alone now. Julian, Vivian, the twins, and the weight of 8 years pressing down on all of them. Julian's voice, when he finally spoke, was emotionless. Flat. He's right, he said. You escaped Marcus. You were free in Italy. You never told me about them. Vivian felt her heart crack all over again. I tried, she said. So many times I tried to contact you. But you didn't, Julian said. And there was no anger in his voice now. Just exhausted devastation. 8 years, Vivian. 8 years they grew up without me. Because you hated me, Vivian's voice broke. The man I loved was gone. You thought I'd abandoned you for money. Why would you believe me about a pregnancy? I was terrified you'd try to take them from me out of spite. Julian flinched like she'd slapped him. You thought I'd use my own children as weapons, he said. I didn't know what you'd become, Vivian whispered. I only knew what I'd destroyed. The brutal honesty hung between them. Years of pain and misunderstanding creating a chasm neither knew how to cross. Matteo started crying, quiet tears sliding down his cheeks as he watched his parents destroy each other with words. Are you going to fight forever? He asked, his small voice cutting through their argument. Both parents turned to him, seeing the fear and confusion on both boys' faces. Julian dropped to his knees again. No, he said firmly. No, we're not going to fight. Luca's voice was small, uncertain. Do you believe Mama now? That she left to protect you? Julian looked at Vivian, really looked at her for the first time since she'd walked into the library, saw past his anger and pain to the woman standing before him. The exhaustion in her eyes, the way she held herself like someone who'd been carrying an impossible weight for too long. The love she still had for him, written in every line of her face. I believe her, he said quietly. Vivian's breath caught. But belief doesn't erase 8 years, Julian continued. I missed everything. Their births, first words, first steps, every birthday, every moment of their lives, every single precious moment. I'm sorry, Vivian said, tears falling freely. God, Julian, I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't give me back time. The brutal truth of it settled over them like ash. I know, Vivian whispered. I know it doesn't. Nothing can give you back what you lost. What we all lost. Julian stood, running his hands through his hair in the gesture she remembered so well. The gesture their sons had inherited. I need time, he said. I need to process this. All of this. The will still stands, Vivian said quietly. 6 months. Cornwall estate. Both of us working together. I can't, Julian said. I can't work with you every day, and not. He stopped. Not what? Vivian asked. Not remember everything we lost, he finished. Then do it for them, Vivian said, gesturing to their sons. Work with me for 6 months so they can know their father, so you can know your sons. After that, I'll disappear again if that's what you want. Julian looked at Luca and Matteo, saw his entire future in their faces, saw 8 years he could never get back and countless years ahead that he could fill with love and presence and all the things a father should be. I don't want you to disappear, he said. I want. He stopped again, the words too complicated, too painful. What do you want? Vivian pressed gently. I don't know, no, Julian admitted. I don't know what I want anymore. Then we have 6 months to figure it out, Vivian said. The library fell silent again, but this time the silence wasn't hostile. It was exhausted. Two people who'd loved each other desperately, who'd been torn apart by circumstances beyond their control, who'd both made choices they regretted, trying to find solid ground in the wreckage. Can we go now? Matteo asked quietly. This place makes me sad. Vivian nodded, gathering her boys close. We're staying at the Dorchester, she said to Julian. If you want to see them, to talk to them, to get to know them. Julian's voice was rough. I'll come tomorrow, he said, if that's all right. It's more than all right, Vivian said. She led the boys toward the door, but Luca broke free at the last moment. He ran back to Julian, throwing his arms around his father's waist in a fierce hug. I'm glad we found you, Papa, he said. Julian's arms came around his son, holding him tight, and the tears he'd been fighting finally fell. I'm glad you found me too, he whispered into Luca's dark curls. The next 2 weeks were strange and painful and beautiful all at once. Julian came to the hotel every day. At first, the visits were awkward. Stilted conversations about school and hobbies and favorite foods, getting to know you questions that should have been answered 8 years ago. But gradually, slowly, father and sons began to find their rhythm. Julian took them to the Natural History Museum, watched their faces light up at the dinosaur skeletons and felt his heart break all over again that he'd missed 8 years of seeing those expressions. He bought them ice cream in Kensington Gardens, taught Luca how to skip, stones in the Serpentine. Listened to Matteo talk about his drawings with the same passion Julian felt for architecture. And Vivian. Vivian watched from a careful distance, giving them space to bond, trying not to let her heart shatter every time she saw how natural Julian was with them, how much they needed him, how much he needed them. On the 5th day, Julian asked if he could take them to his office, show them the buildings he designed, the models and blueprints that were his life's work. Vivian agreed, and that evening when they returned, both boys were electric with excitement. Papa designed the Riverside Tower, Luca announced. We went to the top floor, and you can see all of London. He showed us how buildings are made, Matteo added. From drawings to models to real structures. It's like magic, Mama. Vivian smiled, her heart aching. That night, after the boys were asleep, there was a knock at her hotel room door. Julian stood in the hallway. He looked exhausted, emotionally wrung out, but there was something different in his eyes, something softer than the anger that had been there at the manor. Can we talk? He asked. Vivian stepped aside, letting him in. They sat on opposite ends of the small sofa, an entire universe of history and hurt between them. They're remarkable, Julian said finally. Luca has my stubbornness. Matteo has your gentleness. They're smart and funny and kind. You did an incredible job raising them. The compliment, unexpected and sincere, brought tears to Vivian's eyes. I did the best I could, she said. But they needed you. They've always needed you. Tell me about them, Julian said. Tell me everything I missed. And so she did. She told him about the pregnancy, finding out 3 days before the wedding to Lord Henley. Her terror and desperation, the decision to run. She told him about giving birth in a small Italian hospital with no family, no support, just a midwife who barely spoke English. About holding 2 tiny babies and feeling overwhelmed by love and fear in equal measure. She told him about their first year, the sleepless nights and endless diapers and moments of pure joy when they smiled at her. How Luca had been colicky and Matteo had been the easier baby. How she'd worked 3 jobs to keep them fed and housed. 3 jobs? Julian interrupted, his voice sharp. Vivian nodded. I cleaned houses in the morning, worked at a cafe in the afternoon, did translation work at night after they were asleep. Money was tight for the first few years. Julian's face had gone pale. I thought, he started, then stopped. I thought you'd been living in luxury, that you'd married Henley or someone like him. I never married anyone, Vivian said quietly. There's never been anyone else, Julian. Not in 8 years. The confession hung between them. She told him about the boys growing up. Luca's first word had been Dada, even though Julian wasn't there. Matteo had walked at 10 months, fearless and adventurous. They'd both inherited Julian's love of building things, spending hours with blocks and Legos. She told him about birthdays celebrated in their small cottage. How she'd shown them photographs of Julian and told them stories about their father. How they'd drawn pictures of him and written letters they never sent. They've known about me this whole time, Julian said wonderingly. I never wanted them to feel unwanted, Vivian explained. I wanted them to know that if you'd known about them, you would have loved them. That the only reason you weren't there was because I'd made choices to protect you. Julian was quiet for a long moment. I've been so angry at you, he finally said. For 8 years, I've carried this rage and bitterness. I thought you'd destroyed us for money, that everything we had meant nothing to you. It meant everything, Vivian whispered. You meant everything. But you still didn't tell me about them, Julian said. Even after you were safe in Italy. Even after Marcus couldn't threaten us anymore. You kept them secret. Vivian nodded, accepting the accusation. I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid you'd hate them because they were mine. Afraid you'd try to take them from me. Afraid you'd reject them because I'd hurt you so badly. And as time went on, it became harder and harder to imagine how I'd even begin to tell you. How do you call someone after 8 years and say, by the way, you're a father? You just do, Julian said. You pick up the phone and you do it. I know, Vivian said. I know I should have. And I will regret that cowardice for the rest of my life. They sat in silence, the hotel room suddenly feeling too small to contain all their history. The Cornwall estate, Julian said finally. Your father's will. Do you think he knew about the boys? I don't know, Vivian said. Marcus clearly didn't, but maybe father found out somehow. Maybe this was his way of forcing us back together. Julian stood, pacing to the window overlooking Hyde Park. 6 months working together, he said. 6 months to restore a crumbling estate and figure out what happens next. Can you do it? Vivian asked. Can you stand to be around me for 6 months? Julian turned to look at her. Really look at her. I don't know if I can stand not to be, he admitted. You destroyed me, Vivienne. You shattered my heart so completely, I didn't think I'd ever feel anything again. But standing here now, knowing the truth, I don't know what to feel. Do you hate me? Vivienne asked quietly. Julian was silent for a long moment. No, he finally said. I don't hate you. I don't know what I feel, but it's not hate. That's a start, Vivian said. Is it enough? It has to be. Have you ever had to rebuild trust with someone after years of pain and misunderstanding? Have you ever had to work alongside someone who broke your heart, or whose heart you broke? Comment below if you know what it's like to be trapped between love and hurt, because what happened over the next 6 months would test whether love alone could heal the deepest wounds. 2 weeks later, they arrived at the Cornwall estate. The property was stunning even in its decay. Perched on dramatic cliffs overlooking the Atlantic, the manor house was Georgian in style with later Victorian additions. Wings extended on either side of the main structure. Windows looked out over wild gardens that had once been carefully maintained but now grew in beautiful chaos. It was a metaphor for their relationship. Beautiful foundation, years of neglect, in desperate need of careful restoration. Vivian stood in the overgrown garden with the twins running ahead, exploring with the boundless energy of 8-year-olds. Julian stood beside her, both of them assessing the work ahead. It's going to take more than 6 months, Julian said, his architectural eye already cataloging problems. The roof is compromised. The foundation has water damage. Half the windows need replacing. But it's beautiful, Vivian said. Under all the damage, the bones are beautiful. Julian looked at her, and something passed between them. An understanding that they weren't just talking about the house. The first days were painfully awkward. They worked in careful coordination, her expertise in historical preservation guiding decisions about maintaining period accuracy, his architectural knowledge solving structural problems. They disagreed on almost everything. She wanted to preserve original features even if they were damaged. He wanted to replace with modern equivalents that would last longer. But their disagreements were passionate, engaged, the spark of their old intellectual connection flickering beneath the surface of their careful professionalism. The boys, meanwhile, were having the time of their lives. They explored every corner of the estate, climbed trees in the overgrown orchard, discovered a crumbling gazebo overlooking the sea, found a library full of moldering books that Matteo immediately claimed as his special place. And they watched their parents, with the observant intensity of children who desperately wanted their family to be whole. The first break in the ice came at the end of week 2. Julian had taken Luca to football practice in the nearby village. It was something they'd started doing together. Father and son time, bonding over sports in the way that men do. Vivienne was working in the estate's main hall with Matteo when they heard a crash from the east wing. She ran toward the sound, Matteo close behind, and found that part of the damaged ceiling had collapsed. Water damage from recent rains had finally compromised the structure. Furniture was buried under plaster and wood. Historical paintings and artifacts she'd been cataloging were in danger. Vivian's phone was dead, no way to call for help, and the nearest neighbors were miles away. She and Matteo worked frantically to move what they could, but it was too much for one woman and a small boy. When Julian and Luca returned an hour later, they found Vivian covered in plaster dust, exhausted and crying. Not because she was hurt, but because irreplaceable historical pieces had been damaged. Julian didn't hesitate. He jumped into action, organized the boys to help move smaller items, used his strength to shift furniture and beams. Together, the 4 of them worked until sunset, saving what they could. When they finally stopped, all of them were filthy and exhausted. But they'd saved most of the important pieces. Vivian sank down on the front steps of the manor, and Julian sat beside her. The boys had gone inside to wash up, leaving them alone for the first time in days. "Thank you," Vivian said quietly. "We're a team," Julian said. "At least for the next 6 months." "Are we?" Vivian asked. "Or are we just 2 people forced to work together?" Julian was quiet for a moment. "I miss this," he admitted. "Working with someone who challenges me, who sees beauty in history while I see possibility in the future, who makes me think differently." "I miss you," Vivian said, before she could stop herself. The confession hung in the air between them. Julian turned to look at her. Their faces were inches apart, both of them covered in dust and exhaustion, both of them raw and honest in the fading light. "I never stopped," he said quietly. "Even when I hated you, even when I was with Celeste, I never stopped loving you." Vivian's breath caught. "I never stopped either," she whispered. "Not for a single day in 8 years." The space between them crackled with tension. 8 years of longing, of loss, of love that had never died no matter how hard they'd tried to kill it. Julian's hand came up, cupping her face. His thumb brushed away a smudge of plaster dust on her cheek. "This is insane," he said. "I know. We can't just pick up where we left off. I know. There's so much hurt, so much we need to work through. I know. But God, Vivian, I want to kiss you so badly right now." "Then kiss me," she breathed. He did, and it was like coming home, like 8 years of loneliness and pain melting away in the space of a heartbeat. His lips on hers were familiar and new all at once, gentle and desperate, a question and an answer. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, both were crying. "We can't," Julian said, even as his forehead rested against hers. "It's too complicated. There's too much history." "I know," Vivian agreed, even as her hands fisted in his shirt, keeping him close. "We need time. We need to figure out how to trust each other again." "I know," but neither of them moved. They sat on the steps in the gathering dusk, holding each other like shipwreck survivors. and let themselves believe for just a moment that love might be enough. Inside the house, 2 8-year-old boys watched through the window. Luca and Matteo exchanged a look. "They love each other," Matteo observed. "Then why won't they just say it?" Luca asked, frustrated by the incomprehensible complications of adults. "Because grown-ups make everything difficult," Matteo said wisely. "We need a plan," Luca decided. An Operation Get Parents Together was born. Over the following weeks, the twins deployed their schemes with the single-minded determination of children who wanted their family whole. They locked their parents in the library together, claiming the door was stuck. Took an hour for Julian and Vivian to realize the boys had wedged a chair under the handle from the outside. They created romantic dinner setups, candles and wine, then conveniently disappeared, leaving their parents alone. They orchestrated situations that required teamwork, a treasure hunt that could only be solved by both parents working together, an accidental spill that required both of them to clean up. Some schemes failed spectacularly. Some succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Julian and Vivian caught on quickly, but they played along, touched by their son's efforts, grateful for the excuses to be close to each other, because the truth was, the walls between them were crumbling. Every day working side by side. Every evening having dinner together as a family. Every night saying goodnight to the boys together, tucking them in, reading them stories. It was healing something broken in both of them. They talked about everything, their years apart, the lives they'd built separately, the pain they'd carried. Slowly, carefully, they were learning to trust again. But Marcus's words still echoed in Julian's mind sometimes. "She kept your children from you for 8 years. And in Vivian's darkest moments, she wondered if forgiveness was really possible, if 8 years of loss could ever be forgiven. The breakthrough came during a storm. 6 weeks into their time at Cornwall, a massive Atlantic storm hit the coast. Rain lashed the windows. Wind howled through gaps in the old structure. And in the middle of the night, part of the West Wing roof collapsed. Water poured in, threatening irreplaceable historical artifacts they'd been restoring. Julian and Vivian worked frantically through the storm, moving furniture, covering paintings, trying to save what they could. The boys helped, passing tools and holding flashlights, the 4 of them moving as a unit. A beam started to fall. Weakened by water damage, it came crashing down right where Vivian was standing. Julian saw it in time. He threw himself forward, shoving Vivian out of the way. They went down in a tangle of limbs. The beam crashed where Vivian had been standing a split second before. They lay on the floor, soaked and breathless, Julian's body covering hers protectively, his arms around her, their faces inches apart. "You could have been killed," he said roughly. "So could you," Vivian breathed. Their eyes met, and in that moment, with rain pouring through the broken roof and their sons watching, wide-eyed and frightened, all the carefully maintained distance between them shattered. "I can't lose you again," Julian said fiercely. "I just got you back. I can't lose you. Then don't let me go," Vivian whispered. He kissed her, deep and desperate, a promise and a claim, and she kissed him back with 8 years of longing finally set free. When they finally broke apart, Matteo's voice cut through the storm. "Does this mean you're together now?" Julian and Vivian looked at each other, at the boys watching hopefully, at the wreckage around them, and the life they were building from the ruins. "Yes," Julian said firmly. "Yes, we're together." Luca whooped with joy. Matteo started crying happy tears. And despite the storm raging around them, despite the damage to the house and the work still ahead, despite 8 years of pain and loss, the Blackwood family was finally whole. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Julian and Vivian didn't rush things. They took it slow, rebuilding trust with the same care they were restoring the estate. Long conversations late at night about the past and the future. Stolen kisses when the boys weren't looking. Slowly, carefully, learning how to be a couple again. The boys flourished, having both parents together, watching them laugh and work and slowly fall in love all over again. And the estate itself seemed to come alive under their combined care. What had been crumbling was becoming beautiful again. A monument to the truth that broken things could be restored with patience and love and work. But there was still one ghost they hadn't exorcised. Marcus. He appeared at the estate on a cold morning in November, uninvited and unwelcome, but with legal documents that threatened everything. He was contesting the will. claiming their father had been unduly influenced, that Vivian had coerced him, that the Cornwall estate should come to Marcus as the eldest son. But the real reason, as he admitted with that cold smile, was that he'd found a developer willing to pay millions for the property. He wanted to tear down the historical manor and build luxury condos. "Over my dead body," Julian said, his voice deadly quiet. "That could be arranged," Marcus said with a smirk. Julian lunged forward, but Vivian grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said quietly. "He's not worth it." Marcus's eyes glittered with malice. "You know what's interesting?" he said conversationally. "All this drama about your great love, your sacrifice, your 8 years of suffering. But she still lied to you, Blackwood. She still kept your sons from you. How do you know she's not manipulating you now, using the boys to get what she wants?" The poisonous words hit their mark. Julian's expression shifted. Just for a moment, a flicker of doubt, and Vivian saw it. "After everything," she said quietly, "after everything I've told you, you still doubt me." "Vivian," Julian started. "No," she said, stepping back. "You still think I'm capable of using our children as tools, after 8 years of raising them alone. After every sacrifice I made, you still think I'm manipulating you." "I didn't say that," Julian protested. "You didn't have to," Vivian said. "I saw it in your face." She turned to Marcus, her own fury finally breaking free. "You want to destroy everything, don't you?" she said. "It's not enough that you destroyed my life 8 years ago. You have to keep destroying it." "I simply offered a perspective," Marcus said smoothly. "A question any reasonable person would ask." "Get out," Julian said. "Get out of this house. We'll fight your legal challenge and we'll win." "We'll see," Marcus said. And with that parting shot, he left. The damage, however, was done. Julian and Vivian stood in the restored entryway, the space between them suddenly feeling like miles. "You doubted me," Vivian said quietly. For a second, Julian admitted. "Old habits, old fears, after everything." Yes, the single word hung between them, honest and brutal. Vivian felt tears burning, but she refused to let them fall. "Maybe Marcus is right," she said. "Maybe some wounds are too deep. Maybe we're trying to rebuild something that can't be fixed." "Don't say that," Julian said desperately. "Why not? It's true, isn't it? Part of you will always wonder. Part of you will always doubt whether I'm telling the truth or manipulating you." Julian wanted to deny it, but he couldn't, because Marcus's poison had found fertile ground. 8 years of believing Vivian had betrayed him didn't disappear overnight. Trust, once shattered, was harder to rebuild than any house. "I'm working on it," Julian said finally. "Some days I'm angry, some days I understand, but every day I love you more than the day before." "Is that enough?" Vivian asked. "I don't know," Julian admitted, "but I want it to be." They stood in silence, two people who loved each other desperately, who'd been torn apart and brought back together, who were trying to build something new from the ashes of what they'd lost. But love alone couldn't erase 8 years. Love alone couldn't rebuild trust. Love required work and time and faith. And neither of them knew if they had enough of any of those things. Outside, the Atlantic waves crashed against the cliffs. The restored estate stood proud against the sky. Inside, two people who'd loved and lost and found each other again stood, on opposite sides of a room, wondering if love really could conquer all, or if some wounds were simply too deep to ever fully heal. The answer would come soon enough, in gestures grand and small, in choices made and words spoken, in the slow, painful, beautiful work of learning to trust again. But that's a story for what comes next. The next morning, Vivian woke to find Julian gone. No note, no explanation, just empty space where he'd been. Her heart sank. This was it. Marcus's poison had worked. Julian had left. She went through the motions of making breakfast for the boys, her heart heavy with resignation. 8 years ago, she'd lost him to lies. Now she was losing him again to doubt. "Mama, where's Papa?" Matteo asked, looking around. "He had to go somewhere," Vivian said, forcing brightness into her voice. But Luca wasn't fooled. His 8-year-old face was solemn, worried. "Is he coming back?" he asked quietly. "I don't know, Tesoro. I honestly don't know." The boys were quiet after that. The joy that had filled the house for weeks evaporated, replaced by a familiar sadness. The feeling of incompleteness they'd lived with their entire lives. Vivian tried to work on the estate restoration, but her heart wasn't in it. Every corner reminded her of Julian. The library, where they'd argued about historical accuracy. The gazebo he'd rebuilt with his own hands. The bedroom they'd started sharing, carefully, tentatively, rebuilding intimacy along with trust. 2 days passed with no word. On the 3rd day, a car arrived. But it wasn't Julian. It was his assistant, carrying an envelope. "Mrs. Ashford," the assistant said, then corrected himself. "Miss Ashford. Mr. Blackwood asked me to deliver this." Vivian's hands shook as she took the envelope. Inside was a single card with an address and a time. "Cornwall Estate, tonight at sunset. Come alone. The boys are already here. Jay." Her heart was racing. What was this? Had he taken the boys? Was he leaving her? Was this goodbye? She arrived at the estate as the sun began its descent toward the Atlantic. The transformation took her breath away. The estate, which they'd been slowly restoring for months, was suddenly complete. Or at least, it looked complete. Lights blazed from every window. The gardens had been manicured. Flowers lined the pathway to the front door. White roses, her favorites, everywhere. A path of rose petals led from the gate toward the cliff overlook. Vivian followed it, her heart in her throat. And there, at the restored gazebo overlooking the sea, stood Julian with Luca and Matteo, all 3 in suits. The gazebo was lit with candles. Music played softly, their song from Cambridge, the one they'd danced to in his tiny flat a lifetime ago. Julian turned as she approached. His eyes were red like he'd been crying, but his face was determined. "8 years ago," he began, his voice carrying over the sound of waves, "I thought I knew what love was. I thought it was passion and romance and promises whispered in the dark." Vivian stood frozen, unable to speak. "Then you left, and I thought I knew what heartbreak was," Julian continued. "I thought pain and betrayal and bitterness were the only things I'd ever feel again." He took a step toward her. "I was wrong on both counts," he said. "Real love isn't just passion. It's sacrifice. Real love is giving up everything to protect someone else, even when it destroys you." Another step. "Real love is raising children alone in a foreign country because you were terrified their father might hurt them out of spite," he said. "Real love is working 3 jobs and crying yourself to sleep every night, but still telling those children stories about their father so they know they're loved." Tears were streaming down Vivian's face now. "Real love is what you did, Vivian," Julian said, his own voice breaking. "And I've been a fool. Marcus planted seeds of doubt, and I let them grow because I'm afraid. Afraid of being hurt again. Afraid of trusting completely. Afraid that if I let myself believe in us, I'll lose you all over again." He dropped to his knees. "I'm not asking you to marry me," he said. "Not yet. I don't deserve that right." Vivian's breath caught. "But I'm asking you to let me prove that I can be the man worthy of your sacrifice," Julian said. "Let me be a father to our sons. Let me be a partner in rebuilding this estate and our lives. Let me earn back your trust, even if it takes another 8 years. "Julian," Vivian whispered. Luca stepped forward then, his young face serious. "Mama, we want to be a family," he said. "A real family. We've had enough broken pieces." Matteo joined his brother. "We want to be whole," he said simply. Vivian looked at her sons, at the man kneeling before her, at the restored estate. Behind them that stood as proof that broken things could be beautiful again. "I never stopped trusting you," she said quietly. "I stopped trusting that you could forgive me." "There's nothing to forgive," Julian said fiercely. "You saved my life. You gave me sons. You loved me enough to let me go. So you forgive me for keeping them from you?" Vivian asked, the question that had haunted her for 8 years, finally spoken aloud. Julian was silent for a long moment. "Honest. Even now. I'm working on it," he admitted. "Some days I'm angry about what I missed. Some days I understand why you were afraid. But every single day, I love you more than the day before. And that has to be enough. That has to be the foundation we build on." Vivian felt something inside her chest, something that had been clenched tight for 8 years, finally release. "That's more than enough," she whispered. "That's everything." She pulled him to his feet and kissed him. Deep and passionate and full of promise. The boys cheered. And standing on the cliffs of Cornwall with the Atlantic spreading endlessly before them, The fractured family finally became whole. If you're crying right now, you're not alone. Smash that like button if you believe in second chances. And subscribe to Keith Smith Golden Narrations, because this family's journey shows us that love isn't about perfection, it's about perseverance. Drop a comment telling me, would you have made Vivian's choice? Would you have forgiven her if you were Julian? Because the truth is, real love survives everything, even our worst mistakes. 6 months later, the Cornwall estate hosted its grand reopening. But it was more than just an estate unveiling. It was a wedding. Small and intimate, nothing like the society spectacle Julian's wedding to Celeste would have been. Just close friends, the people who'd supported them through the hardest times. Vivian wore a simple white dress, elegant and understated. Julian wore a suit, but his eyes were only for her. Luca and Matteo stood as best men and ring-bearers, their faces shining with joy. The vows they wrote together were honest and raw. "I promise to trust you with the truth, always," Vivian said, her voice clear and strong. "No more secrets, no more running, no more choosing silence over honesty, even when the truth is hard. I promise to trust in your love, even when circumstances look dark," Julian said. "No more doubt, no more distance, no more letting fear make my decisions." Together, they spoke the final vow. "We promise to build a life as solid as this estate," they said. "As beautiful as this view, as enduring as our love. We've survived the worst. Now we get to live the best." The kiss was witnessed by their sons, by friends who'd watched them struggle and survive, by the restored estate that stood as proof that anything broken could be rebuilt with patience and love. At the reception, they danced under the stars. The boys ran wild with other children. Friends toasted to second chances and hard-won happiness. Marcus wasn't there. His legal challenge had failed spectacularly when evidence surfaced provided anonymously of his threats 8 years ago. Apparently, one of the men involved in the gambling debts had kept records, and when contacted by investigators, had been willing to testify. Marcus was facing charges. The family name he'd worked so hard to protect was now permanently stained. But Vivian felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that he could never hurt them again. Late in the evening, Julian led Vivian to the cliff overlook, away from the celebration. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "The 8 years we lost?" Vivian considered the question honestly. "Every day," she admitted. "But I don't regret the choice that saved you. And I don't regret the sons we have. They're remarkable, Julian. And I got to watch them grow, even if you couldn't." "They are remarkable," Julian agreed. "Like their mother, like their father," Vivian countered. He pulled her close, and they stood watching the moonlight on the water. "I have something to tell you," Vivian said softly. Julian pulled back to look at her face. "I'm pregnant," she said. His expression cycled through shock, disbelief, and then pure, radiant joy. "A baby?" He breathed. "Due in 6 months," Vivian confirmed. "I found out last week." Julian's hands went to her still flat stomach, reverence in his touch. "I get to be there this time," he said wonderfully. "From the beginning." "From the very beginning," Vivian promised. They kissed as the waves crashed below, as music drifted from the celebration, as their son's laughter rang through the night air. 2 years after that wedding, the Blackwood family had grown and flourished in ways none of them could have imagined. The Cornwall estate wasn't just a home now. It was a foundation, the Vivian Blackwood Foundation for single mothers, providing housing and support for women raising children alone. It was Vivian's passion project, born from her own experience of struggling in poverty with 2 babies and no help. Julian's architecture firm had incorporated Vivian's historical expertise. They were partners in every sense, personally and professionally, designing restorations that honored the past while building for the future. Luca and Matteo, now 10 years old, were thriving. Adjusted, happy, with a father who never missed a football match or a school play. They had a baby sister now, Elena Rose, named for the second chance at life her parents had been given. And Marcus. They rarely spoke of him. He'd served a short prison sentence for fraud and coercion. When he was released, he'd attempted reconciliation, showing up at the estate with apologies that rang hollow. Julian had been ready to throw him out, but Vivian, surprisingly, had been more measured. "You can't undo what you did," she'd told Marcus. "You can't give us back the years we lost. But you're still my brother. We'll never be close. We'll never trust you. But we can be civil, for the sake of the family name you care so much about." It was more grace than Marcus deserved, and everyone knew it. But it was Vivian's choice to make, and Julian supported her. Now, on a Sunday afternoon in early spring, the family gathered for a portrait. The artist they'd commissioned was setting up in the estate's main hall. Luca and Matteo flanked their parents, their faces bright with mischief and joy. Julian's arm was around Vivian, his other hand resting on her shoulder. Vivian held baby Elena, the infant's tiny fist wrapped around her mother's finger. The portrait would be titled Second Chances, and it would hang in the foundation's main entrance, a reminder to every woman who sought help there that broken things could heal, that love could survive anything, that hope was never truly lost. As the artist worked, Vivian looked at her family and felt overwhelming gratitude, not for the ease of their journey, because it hadn't been easy, but for the destination, for the truth that had set them free, for the love that had survived everything thrown at it. This is what real love looks like, she thought. Not perfect, not without scars, but whole. Now, before we finish this story, there are lessons here that matter. Truths about life and love and the impossible choices we all face. So let me share them with you. Lesson 1. Sacrifice and love. True love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about impossible choices made for someone else's good. Vivian chose Julian's life over her happiness. She gave up everything, her family, her country, her entire life to keep him safe. That's not weakness. That's the strongest kind of love there is. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes it means sacrificing your own happiness. And that doesn't make the love less real. It makes it more powerful than most people will ever understand. Lesson 2. Truth and communication. Secrets, even ones kept for the right reasons, have a cost. 8 years of separation could have been avoided with truth. But fear and trauma make communication impossible sometimes. Vivian was terrified Julian would reject her or take the children. Julian was too hurt to trust anything she said. The lesson here is that we have to create safe spaces for hard conversations. We have to be willing to hear painful truths and speak them, even when it's terrifying. Because silence, even protective silence, creates distance that love alone can't always bridge. Lesson 3. Forgiveness is a process. Julian didn't forgive Vivian instantly. And that's okay. That's real. Real forgiveness takes time, work, and understanding. It's okay to be angry about past hurts while working toward healing. It's okay to have days where you struggle and days where you're at peace. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing love, despite the pain. It's deciding that the future matters more than the past. And it's something you have to choose again and again, not just once. Lesson 4. Children's wisdom. Sometimes children see clearly what adults complicate. Luca and Matteo wanted simple love, a simple family. They didn't understand why their parents made everything so difficult. And their simple faith, their uncomplicated hope, became the bridge that helped their parents find their way back to each other. We should learn from that. Learn to see with childlike hope. Learn to believe in possibility, even when experience tells us to be cynical. Lesson 5. Second chances. Not everyone gets a second chance. And not every second chance works out. But when love is real, when both people are willing to do the work, miracles happen. The Cornwall estate was a perfect metaphor. Broken things can be rebuilt, often more beautiful than before. Scars can become part of the beauty. And what seemed destroyed forever can find new life with patience, care, and love. 5 years after their wedding, the Blackwood family stood on the same cliffs where Julian had proposed the second time. Elena was 3 now, chasing her brothers through the gardens. Vivian was pregnant again, carrying twins this time. Girls, the ultrasound had shown. Julian joked that he was going to be outnumbered soon. They'd expanded the foundation. It now served hundreds of women across England. Vivian's story, carefully told without identifying details, had become a beacon of hope for women in impossible situations. Julian's firm was internationally recognized, but his favorite projects were always the ones he did with Vivian, restoring historical buildings and giving them new purpose. "Mama, Papa, come quick," Luca shouted from the garden. "We found something." The family walked together to where the boys were digging near the old gazebo. They'd unearthed a time capsule, buried decades ago by previous owners of the estate. Inside were letters, photographs, mementos of another family who'd lived and loved in this place. One letter caught Vivian's attention. It was from a woman to her husband, dated 1945. "My darling," it read, "the war took 3 years from us. 3 years we'll never get back. but we have 50 more ahead, and I choose to fill them with love, not regret. The past is gone. The future is ours. Let's not waste another moment. Vivian read it aloud, her voice catching on the words. When she finished, Julian pulled her close. She was right, he said quietly. The past is gone. We have the future, and I don't want to waste another moment. Neither do I, Vivian whispered. They buried the time capsule again, but not before adding their own letter. For future families to find. For future lovers struggling with their own impossible choices. In it, they wrote simply, love is worth fighting for. Truth is worth speaking. Forgiveness is worth pursuing. And second chances, when given with honest hearts, are the most precious gifts we'll ever receive. Don't give up. Don't stop believing. And never, ever let fear make your choices. We almost lost everything to fear. But love, real love, brought us home. The Blackwood family. Cornwall, England. And as the sun set over the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the family walked back to the estate together, whole, healed, home. This story shows us that love isn't about perfection. It's about perseverance. It's about choosing each other again and again, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that broken things can heal and love can survive anything, then I need you to do something for me. First, smash that like button. Let me know this story resonated with you. Second, share this video with someone who needs to hear that second chances are possible. That love can survive betrayal and distance and years of pain. That hope is never truly lost. Third, subscribe to Keith Smith Golden Narrations for more stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us what it means to be human. Turn on those notifications because you won't want to miss what's coming next. And finally, drop a comment. Tell me your story. Would you have made Vivian's choice? Would you have forgiven her if you were Julian? Have you ever had to choose between love and survival? Have you ever gotten a second chance you didn't think you deserved? I read every single comment. Your stories matter. Your experiences matter. And this community we're building together, it's about more than just entertainment. It's about connecting through the truths that make us human. Remember this. The greatest love stories aren't the ones without pain. They're the ones where love survives the pain. They're the ones where people choose each other despite everything. They're the ones that prove hope is stronger than hurt and truth is stronger than lies. Vivian and Julian lost 8 years, but they got 50 more. They got to raise their children together. They got to build something beautiful from ruins. They got to prove that love, real love, never truly dies. It just waits. And when given the chance, it blooms again, more beautiful than before. So whatever you're facing today, whatever impossible choice is in front of you, whatever pain you're carrying from the past, remember their story. Remember that broken things can heal, that love can survive, that second chances are real, and never ever give up on hope. This is Keith Smith, bringing you golden narrations that touch the heart and speak to the soul. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love, the possibility of redemption, and the truth that we're all just trying to find our way home. Thank you for being part of this family. Thank you for listening. And thank you for believing that stories like this matter. Because they do. And so do you.